This program is proudly brought to you by Telecom Limited and Daytech.
Good night, Papua New Guinea. I'm Malcolm Wira, and welcome to another episode of Infocus. In this session, we discuss the potential of the blue economy in Papua New Guinea. Joining us for discussions, we have Professor Chalapan KALUWIN, Lecturer of Environmental Sciences at the School of Natural and Physical Sciences at the University of Papua New Guinea. Professor, thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, EMTV and Papua New Guinea. You're welcome.
Firstly, Professor, what is the blue economy and how did the concept come about?
The issue of blue economy actually started from, if I can simplify it, when everywhere around the world, when the light goes into the ocean or into the river, that light, you cannot see it, you see surface, you only see like 2 meters to 3 meters where the light can go in. Anything further down below, where it becomes blue. So it's a bit like the rainbow. The concept of it started with that notion about what is a blue ocean and what is a blue economy. In terms of translating this, it started with the resources on looking at in the ocean as far as North Pole, South Pole, all those places all the way down to the equator where Papua New Guinea lies. About within like the furthest south of the equator is for Papua New Guinea is close to 1.5 degrees south. For Papua New Guinea, the rest then it goes down close to 14 degrees south. Within that area, we call it that's the blue ocean for Papua New Guinea. And most Pacific Island countries, the impact of the ocean is from the North Pole and South Pole on this planet called the planet Earth. And so when people were talking about this in terms of resourcing, a lot of them talked about your land, your agriculture, your mining, and all those on the land. Sooner or later, the people start seeing that the resources, especially in the ocean, is quite exciting. And so the terminology blue came about by a number of people around the world as far as Americans, Canadians, everywhere, Africans, South Africa, they started talking, including the Pacific, they're talking about what does blue mean. And so the blue talks about what is inside that ocean. And that's how it is that most countries, if I take it back to the Pacific, that's what the Pacific countries decided to do in some years ago. In 1990, 91, they started talking about the Pacific Ocean, what the resource is and what it means to the Pacific countries. And so when it happened, the Pacific countries came across and developed what we call some framework on oceans for the Pacific in relation to how do you manage your resources in that ocean. So generally that's what I mean by this. You go way down deeper, you see mining. You go further down, you can see little crabs and so on that you don't know is sitting there. The geology of it is sitting there, then the mining of that place. Then you come and find this biodiversity sitting there, seagrass sitting down there, then you come across further up. And so all those are important part of it. Like we were talking about, for example, tuna. The biggest import of tuna is sitting in the Pacific, and it's sitting in Papua New Guinea in relation to blue economy here.
Now, what are the key economic sectoral activities that can be derived from the ocean or from the blue economy? You just mentioned tuna, which is an ideal example.
There's quite a fair bit in the Pacific, and especially if you want to concentrate on Papua New Guinea, where we found out that a lot of international laws and so on, they were looking at the ocean here. And for Papua New Guinea, we wanted to look at some of the resources here too, because if you can think about this, a lot of the resources sitting along the coastline of all these, say, 700 different islands in Papua New Guinea, the economic resources is talking about fisheries, for example. It's looking at specific ones like, for example, tuna, the shark, the stingrays. Those are important resources. The dolphin, they are part of your tourism issues as well. The turtle in relation to water species in that ocean. And then when you go and talk about this, if you dive further down, you go into mining. And some countries around the world want to come and talk about mining in Papua New Guinea and the Pacific. So these are some of the countries in the States that they have some ideas with trying to partner with Papua New Guinea. Mining is one of them. Then they're talking about the biodiversity of the ocean, that like seagrass and so on. Way down, further down, you have so much what they call crustaceans, like crabs, in the simpler terms. They're sitting in there, but nobody's touching it. In certain countries, they go further down, like the US. They will set their nets all the way down to close to, 100 meters down below to collect that crab way down there. Canadians do the same thing, and so on. Australians do the same thing. New Zealand, they all do the same thing in our part of the region. So the resources in there, it starts from mining way down deep, biodiversity in relation to, crustacean, in relation to seagrass, all right, seaweed. They're important part of it, including those people who go after coral reef. And coral, a lot of Papua New Guineans here go and burn it, and they use it for lime or kambang, as to speak. And that's being depleted right now in relation to looking at all the corals in this region. So part of this is like partnering with what they call the Coral Triangle in Papua New Guinea. There's 8 countries looking at this for your interest. And it's sitting there, Australian, Indonesia, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, Philippines, they're all members of this coral reef as part of these ocean resources. And so it's an important aspect of it in how do you pick it up. In relation to Papua New Guinea, we have tried some of these aspects of resources, like seagrass, coral reef, biodiversity issues, mining in the ocean, the fish, all right? And so we've picked up some of these examples in relation to international waters and so on and so forth. We've come up with, now we have important laws. We have developed what they call the Papua New Guinea Ocean Policy. It's sitting with us in relation to the blue economy. So we have a legislation now that talks about how do you look after your ocean. And so it's important people from outside who come in, if you want to have resources here, you can go back, we call it the bottom-up approach. If you go down to any part of Papua New Guinea, if you don't know this about your EZ, or the provincial boundaries, or your local boundaries, where you come from, or we call the clan boundaries, a lot of people don't know this, that on the reef into the deep sea where people go and fish in their traditional time, that boundary still belongs to them. It doesn't belong to the government. And they have the right to talk about any resource in the deep sea where they usually go and look for, let's say, fish. People go and dive for turtle in the Bismarck Seas and all over this place. That resource still belongs to the people, the community in this. These are the kind of what they call blue economy that stretch from the shoreline all the way down into the deep sea, past your EEZ. So we have a big EEZ in this country, but in relation to managing it, we're slowly moving down that direction.
Now, Professor, according to the Conservation International, the blue economy includes economic benefits that cannot be marketed. What would be some examples?
Yes. The group that NGOs, for example, that kind of WWF and IUCN, these are what's called watchdogs, and they put some resource behind it. Greenpeace as well, those are they do this kind of thing that, what are some, benefits behind this? That's what I've just told you. This is, a fair bit of it is about how do you get our own people about picking it up? And as I emphasized to you, this particular issue about the boundary from your coastline all the way in the deep sea belongs to our people. Nobody owns it. If you get up and you say this one, like they have the deep sea mining in New Ireland and Rabaul, when they had this, we actually advised them that that resources belongs to the people from New Ireland and New Britain. It doesn't belong to them. That's their fishing territory. That's where they usually go. That's where they go and dive and so on. Nobody takes that thing out of what they call our own legislation, anthropological explanation, what I call it, that it belongs to the landowners. And don't think that they don't own this. There's examples around the world like this. In Australia, they have the same thing. Where you go to Carpentaria, where the Aborigines say Thursday Island, that's further down that line. Australians have the right, the Aborigines have the right to say that's theirs. Within their legislation, they do this. In Papua New Guinea, we have the legislation to protect our own people in relation to resources as well. So that's what I meant by, if you're looking at seaweed, seagrass, mangrove, in that area, all the way further up, you can go down, 10 nautical miles and so on. That's still there, as long as you prove it, that resources belongs to your community or your clan.
Thank you, Professor. We now go for a quick break. Join us on the other side for more discussions. Welcome back. You're watching Infocus. Now, Professor KALUWIN, to what extent should sustainability be captured in the development of the blue economy?
Yes, this is very, very important about when we were talking about sustainability. Sustainability of this is like we've been actually taking it and we've been trying to get our Papua New Guinea people to understand this. It's in our constitution. There's 5 goals that we talk about in our constitutions about the environment, the livelihoods, and then in our islands and oceans and so on. This sustainability definition, if you look at this, it's about going back home and talking about who owns the resources. And so sustainability here, to me, in terms of blue economy, we've been practicing it in our university in the Pacific and all of that, trying to make sure our own people tell you that at first you start at home. It's what they call it the bottom up. Once you start understanding the governance issue about who owns the resources, you get your clan people in, they understand it, you get the government to understand that blue economic resources, whether it's on forestry or it's in mangroves or seagrass or in fisheries or the coral reef that people like, you across, all the way to Sepik and across to Milne Bay. A lot of people like to take on coral reef to convert it to seagrass. But it starts from home. If you get the governance right, that's number one. Within the governance issue, sustainability talks about that one first, you tidy this, then you go into what they call an economic development. What is economic in relation to that resources on blue economy? And so that economic value, whether you sell it, you give it to the people at home, how much goes back to their home, and they have to benefit from that. On the other side, we call it the environment. That's the other pillar. We call it pillar number 3. Environment is an important part of Papua New Guineans' own people about looking after themselves in relation to, do they destroy it, like the mining aspects? Do they cut the forestry? Those are the environmental issues and waste issues we're concerned. Do you dump your mining into the sea, or do you dump your mining up on the land? You're a small little country, but that's the environment issues that must be looked about. The other pillar that we always pushing is what they call this livelihood pillar, about whatever happens in your sustainability, whether it's a blue economy, it must reach what they call the health issues. That's the livelihood issues. You must impact on that. Your housing issues, there's a lot of people must know about this. Then your education is quite an important one. And there's others as well, but in terms of what you're dealing with, those are the 4 most important issues about sustainability. So let me educate you all about this. That's how we develop it, to make sure we call it's the Papua New Guinea way, but it starts from home, about what is your resources. If it's in the blue resources, blue economy, that's what we term it as the blue economy. We've written our own policies along those 4 pillars for Papua New Guinea government to make sure that you practice this. If you take it home into your province or you're to LLG, that's an important framework that we've modeled it already in a number of provinces in this country.
Now, what would you say are the main challenges that limit the potential to develop the blue economy?
There's always a couple of challenges. The number one is about understanding this. But within that framework that I just told you, the blue economy, our own people need to understand that the resources belong to them. That's number one, and I told you, understanding that is important. Communication is important. The education and capacity building at home starts first. Is one of the. Once you know this, then it comes to what they call the economics of it, the finance of it. They must understand that at the end of the day, when the blue economy comes up, education starts first. They have to educate them because you're now talking about not at home. You're connecting all over the world. You're trying to market your, what I call blue, could be blue carbon, as we've been talking about, around the world. Who owns that blue carbon? Well, it's in the sea, it's on the land, and so on. Our own people must understand that the blue economy talks about climate change, it talks about biodiversity, it talks about land, it talks about all of this. But those are the most important things that they must understand this. It's an important aspects of what it means, really.
Thank you, Professor KALUWIN. We now go for a quick break. Join us on the other side for more discussions. Welcome back. You're watching In Focus. Now, Professor KALUWIN, the government has launched the National Ocean Policy 2020 to 2030, as you mentioned, as well as the National Ocean Secretariat. How will this guide the development of the blue economy in Papua New Guinea?
A lot of this is, it's important that, a number of us were part and parcel of this group that we sat down together to develop our own ocean policy. So when you get people who have got experience in this kind of thing and you put them together, our experience goes as far as talking to the Americans and so on. But this policy, when we developed it, we consulted people within our country to see what does it mean. The implementation of this policy is quite important about, we have a secretariat, or we have an office in Waigani called the Ocean Secretariat. We have an ocean policy. The most important is to take, how do you take this policy and take it to the province where those who are in the, you got to understand there's about 750 islands in this country. And those, half of them in Milimbe in relation to the number of islands, and then the second one is in Manus province, and then the rest are all scattered around the country. The communities of this island, it's basically saying, do you know this law? Do you know this ocean policy? How do you implement it in your province? Even though we have actually started talking about our own people to know this government law, the question is about, can you interpret, can you do your own laws in our own provinces? And so that's what they call going back home, and it's a bottom-up approach about getting our own people. We have a lot of smart people gone home already. In Milimbe, for example, in Kerema, in Madang, they're talking to their own people to talk about getting a policy like this. It's still an ocean framework. The activity is such, but under what they call MSR, Marine Resource Secretariat, they have to make some commentaries in relation to approval of boats coming in or shipping coming in. That's only for research and so on. In relation to economic sustainability or economic of this, it needs to, what I call it, and I repeat again, it has to come from what I call a bottom-up approach. Our own people, the provincial governments, our local governments, our ward, and our clan must understand this. If you understand it, you're protecting the interest of sustainability in our own country and our own people. It is a challenge for the Secretariat and the government to still go down and do more awareness in relation to the ocean boundaries for the province and that particular thing, because our own people, those who come from the island, will challenge the government in relation to, this is my ocean reef system. This is the mangrove belongs to me, not doesn't belong to the government. The seagrass belongs to us. The fishing ground, the reef system, as far as in between, going from, say, Siasi, Madang, all those way up to Manus in that ocean, that's still landowners. They belong, those reef, those islands belongs to those people. When you go to Rita Island, there's a couple of islands like this, where the people say this. We've got Germans coming across to look at the geology of it in terms of science. But they have to get permission from our own people to look at where they can benefit from it as well, if it becomes something useful. And so the ocean is example, is an important one. Our Ocean Secretariat need to work closely, and we need to get some more resources test cases along the Moreton coastline, all the way to Keramat, down to, Milne Bay, New Guinea Islands, and so on, and how they connect up to the highlands as well. So don't forget that up in the highlands, they have an influence in relation to the ocean. You can pollute the islands, but they could actually, if they become smart, they'll understand that you actually polluted their agriculture and their forest. But they haven't gone down that line yet. So this is part of the Ocean Secretariat that has to do a fair bit of awareness in relation to the 6th largest country in the world. But the ocean is still the biggest, one of the biggest aspects of in this planet.
It's a good segue into our next question, and it's that what role do you see traditional knowledge can play in the development of the blue economy in Papua New Guinea?
We are the sleeping giants in this country. Like I said, you just about 12 million people. And most of our people know about this, but they're protecting it in terms of their knowledge about their coastline, their ocean, their reef system. And if we do engage with them, that's basically what I said. The most important is a bottom-up approach. The government must go down to people, work with them and come up and make sure that this law or this policy becomes a reality. At the moment, we have developed it, but it hasn't been tested out yet. It still has a long way to go. But these aspects of it in relation to traditional knowledge, a lot of people won't share it. It's a private thing that most Papua New Guineans or across the Pacific, if you travel as far as going all the way to Guam and Marianas and so on, and Saipan, and then go all the way to Tahiti and so on, if you've been across to that place in relation to Pacific Islands and Papua New Guinea, you find that we maintain our own culture. We maintain the dignity of who we are. And so the preservative of our own ocean resources is still an important aspect of how do you support our own people. Just because we have a government, it's sitting up here, but the resources, like I said, it's still sitting with our own people, that we have to work with them to make sure sustainability in the long term for our own children starts from there. That's what I mean by, for example, if you know that when did the last cyclone come up to your corner, the old man will tell you this. Or when we say, when did the moon appear, whether it's under this tree or from the other side. These are traditional knowledge that our own people always knew about, but they haven't shared it yet. We need to work with them to make sure that being smart, you're going overseas and coming back. This traditional knowledge is quite important. It has to be integrated. In our ocean policy, we have actually made sure that we have an integrated approach dealing with our own people and our own government and partners as well.
Professor Chalapan KALUWIN, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's been a privilege and a pleasure to be communicating with you and the rest of the country and anybody else who's listening to discussion in this context. So thank you so much.
Well, viewers, that's all the time we have for this edition of Infocus. Do join us again next week, Monday, for another episode. Till then, bye for now.